Hi guys, my name is Amber, and I'm one of the front-end subject matter experts here at Quotum. And today we're going to do a quick overview of how conditions and loops work in JavaScript. These concepts operate the same way they do in other programming languages, just with a bit of differences here and there, so let's dive in and see how they work. Before getting into loops, let's first talk about conditions. You'll often have loops and conditions working with each other when trying to solve a problem or running blocks of code repeatedly, but only based off of certain terms. There's different conditional statements we can use for different scenarios. If something is true, do this, but if it's not, do that. But if that's not true, but something else happens to be true, do this thing instead. And finally, if you want to do something, if the condition could be several different things, switch between those cases. So with any kind of programming, we want to be able to perform tasks repeatedly. Loops in JavaScript allows us to run blocks of code continuously until a condition is no longer met. When creating our loops, we have to give it clear signs of when it can run, how often it can run, and when we need to break out of the loop so it doesn't run infinitely. So with that, we have for loops, and they allow us to define all of our conditions within the loop itself and then run some code continuously. For loops have three statements. Our first one is our initial expression, and it tells us how to initialize a variable that will start off the loop. Our second statement is our conditional expression. This is required and tells us what condition needs to be met in order for the loop to continue. You'll usually see some sort of less than or greater than operator giving a cap on the number of times our initial variable can run. And our last statement is the increment expression. This tells whether or not our variable is going to increase each time or decrease each time. We also have for in loops and for of loops, and that can be used to iterate through objects and arrays a bit more easily. There's two other loops that we can work with, while loops and do while loops. They're still going to have the same behavior as for loops, but with a bit cleaner syntax. While loops and do while loops still evaluate a condition and run some code based off of that condition being true or false. So now that we've talked a little bit about what loops and conditions are, let's go in and do a couple of code examples so we can see how they work. So here I already have my code editor pulled up and a browser window as well, so we can see what's in our console once we run our code. We're going to go through some if-else and else-if statements, for loops, for of and for in loops, while and do while loops, and then finally show you guys a switch statement. So let's start off with if statements. If statements, it kind of does what you think it would do. It's going to see if something is true, and if something is true, it's going to run a block of code. So you're going to start off with an if, and then in your parentheses here is the condition that you're going to want to evaluate. So let's check something that we know is true. Is 2 greater than 0? So if 2 is greater than 0, I want to console log this is true. So let's save this. And we can see here in the console that we do get this is true. Now, what if our condition wasn't true? Then I can use an else statement to follow up with the if, to run an alternate block of text if that didn't end up happening. So if this wasn't true, then we'll console log this was false. So let's switch this up a bit. Now we'll see if 2 is greater than 3, which we know is not true. And you see here, instead we're getting a this was false. Now, sometimes it's not going to be an either or type of situation. If you want to test a second condition, you can do that with the else if. So we're going to break this apart here. And let's put in another condition to test. So if 2 is not greater than 3, but if 2 is greater than 1, then we're going to console log the second condition was true. And there we go. We see that the else if statement hit the loop and our second condition ended up being true. So now that we see a basic example of how if-else statements work, let's tie that in to creating a basic for loop. I'm going to copy and paste a quick for loop right here. And let's walk through the steps that our loop is taking. So we're starting off here with our statements. We have our initial value set to 0, and that initial value is going to keep increasing by 1 as long as it stays less than or equal to 10. And within our code block, we have an if, an else if, and an else statement to control what we're going to see in our console each iteration of the loop. So I created a condition variable here that's basically going to check and see if our current loop number is an even number. The modulus operator is just going to check and see if there's a remainder if it's divided by a certain number. So if our number is divided by 2 and there's no remainder, then we know it's an even number. So our if statement is going to check our condition. If it's true, then it's going to log matched condition at loop, and then we're just concatenating here to give us the number of our loop here. But if it doesn't meet that condition, but it meets a second condition, where we're going to check and see if that number is greater than 6, it's going to console log matched second condition at, and then our current loop. And if else it doesn't match any of those conditions, then we're going to console log didn't match any conditions at our current loop number. So this will continue to the next iteration. So let's save this. And let's read what we have here in our console. We see that it did match at loop 0 because technically 0 is an even number, but it didn't match anything with 1, so it's continuing to the next iteration. Here it matched at 2, and it didn't match at 3, so it's continuing on. It matched at 4, it didn't match at 5, it matched at 6, and it didn't match the first condition at 7, but it matched the second condition because 7 is greater than 6. For 8, it matched the first condition. For 9, it matched the second condition. And at 10, it matched the first condition. We made sure that our loop doesn't run if I ever becomes greater than 10. And if we went to 11, it would have been greater. So it went ahead and ended the loop. Now, there are ways that we can control what happens in our loop, and that's with using two statements, a break statement or a continue. So say if we wanted to end the loop after it met the first condition. So let's console log broke out of the loop, and we're just going to add a simple break. So you can see here that it matched at 0 and then it broke out right after because we ended the loop ourselves. if I got rid of that and I got rid of that, but instead of breaking out, I just wanted to kind of skip over this iteration and continue on, then I can use the continue statement. So you can see here that we're not getting anything for the even numbers. All we see is something for 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And that's because we skipped that loop with the continue statement. So this is the basic setup of a for loop. You can have multiple conditions in here if you wanted to make it a little bit more complicated, but this is just a quick breakdown of what happens during each iteration of a loop. So let me comment this out. And now let's see other type of loop examples that we have. So one other loop that we can do is called a for in loop. So I'm just going to copy and paste some code here. A for in loop helps us to iterate through properties of an object. So we have a basic object here, which is just going to be a data type that holds properties and values and key value pairs. So we have a make and a model. And here, it's going to be constructed similarly to a regular for loop, but we're going to create a variable key in car, and then we're going to console log our key. So let's save that. And you can see here that we're getting the name of those keys in each of our properties in our object, make and model. And similar to for in loops, we also have for of loops. Now, for of loops are going to help us out with arrays or anything that's iterable. It's going to give us those values every time. So let's save this. And now you can see that when we're console logging the key this time, we're now getting the value of everything in our array. Milk, eggs, and butter. So let's console log this out. And let's see a basic while and do while loop. So here, okay. So for our while loop, it's going to run very similarly to how a basic for loop runs. It's going to evaluate a condition, and then it's going to run this loop continuously while this condition is true. So here we have a basic count variable set to 0, and as long as this count variable is less than 10, then we're going to console log what our current count is. Now, the important thing with while loops is to make sure you're doing something in the loop to change the condition. Otherwise, it's going to run infinitely, and you don't want that to happen with your loops. So in our while loop, we're going to change the value of count each time. We're going to increment it by 1, so that way, eventually, it will be greater than 10. There's 3 ways that you can write this syntax here, but everything is just going to be having the original count variable, and you're setting that equal to itself plus 1 every time, so the value of that variable will change. And because it changed, as you can see here, after 9, it broke out of the loop. And you can see here with our do while loop, it's going to do the same thing, but it's going to kind of flip it. It's going to do our code block first, and then it's going to check that condition. So you see here that we have a false condition variable. 2 is not less than 0, so it shouldn't run. But because we have our code block here with a do keyword, it's going to run our console log anyway. So it runs at least one time, then it's going to check our condition. So you can see that this will run anyway, has been logged in our console. And the last thing that I want to show you guys is a quick example of a switch case statement. So let me copy and paste this here. And I'll go ahead and comment out our while and do while loops. And we can see kind of how a switch statement will be broken up. So a switch is still going to run a certain block of code, but it's going to have multiple cases that it can check against. So this function here is going to take in an argument, and it's going to take in some sort of number. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's just going to be some amount of cash. Now, we want to do certain things if that case happens to be a certain thing that we're looking for. So these type of statements are broken down a little bit more. It's going to perform some sort of action for us or return us some sort of thing based off of whatever the case is that we're switching back and forth against. So we have a switch here, and it's going to be evaluating the cash that we're bringing in. So if that cash happens to be 100, then we're going to alert, not enough money, save more. If it's 200, we're going to get almost, but still need more. If it's 400, we're going to get much better, almost there. If it's 500, we're going to get awesome job savings. But if it's none of this, we need to make sure that we have a default case. And in this case, we're just going to alert unknown amount given. Let's go ahead and save this. And you can see if we put in 100, we get not enough money, save more. We put in 200, almost, but still need more. With 400, we're getting almost there. With 500, we're getting awesome job saving. And then we just put in something that wasn't available, so we have unknown amount given. And you can see where I called that function here. Alright guys, so this was just some quick learning about how loops and conditions work in JavaScript. Please take this time to continue your learning, and if you have any questions, definitely let us know. Thanks for watching and have a great day.